The truth about Mancera fragrances.
Here's some codes to save you some cash on your next Middle Eastern niche or designer fragrances.
What's going on, guys? My name is Neeb. Welcome back to AROMATIX. Today we're going to be talking about blind buys from the house of Mancera. I've been on a mission to basically buy a bunch of fragrances of popular brands. So this whole the truth thing doesn't mean that you're only going to find the truth here, but I've always kept it true. So it's just a title and the reality of it. The truth about 5 Mancera fragrances is what we're going to be talking about here today. Before we get started, make sure to leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and let's just go ahead and get started. So these are all fragrances that I blind bought and basically formulated a 24-hour first impression on. I think it's pretty worthy in noting and knowing which ones I'm driven to want to wear and not want to wear, etc. So 5 fragrances, a few of which are kind of new. There's Cosmic Pepper, there's Amber Fever, and I'm trying to get my hands on a little bit of the harder to find ones. So make sure to leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and let's go ahead and get started with one of the best ones in this haul, and it's called Oud Blue Notes by Mancera. So Mancera has the very signature box presentation and that little sleeve that you're going to find with all of their fragrances. It's not really anything brand new or different from any of their fragrances. And what we do with the box and sleeves is pretty much the same thing what we do with all of the dang boxes and sleeves of every single fragrance. So
wow, this is garbage.
The bottle presentations are actually pretty nice and simple. It's nice to be able to stack them up and have a consistency across the boards. And the atomizers for them is actually really good too. It's pressurized and you can pick how much juice you get. So initially, first impression, it smells really good. It's this fruity, woody style fragrance that's also powdery and slightly floral at the same time. The powdery nature coming from violet, orris, and then there's also a hefty dose of rose, seeming to be this rose-wood combination, not oud per se. Much more interesting than that sounds, because when you think rosewood cabos, in that world it gets pretty boring. This one having a bunch more fruits, lively, a little bit fresh even in the opening, drying down into a more rose, patchouli, wood-centric fragrance that's powdery, and still holding on to a few of those floral, powdery aspects for the entirety of the fragrance. I think it's pretty unisex, slightly leaning more masculine as it starts to dry down and revealing more of that sandalwood and some of that leather. In the opening to mid is where it seemingly is the most unisex, and as it starts to dry down, it gets creamy leather. I would say that the interesting factor about this fragrance is going to be the opening to the mid. As it starts to dry down, it doesn't necessarily get generic smelling, but it loses a lot of those interesting factors coming from the lemon, fruits, a little bit of that natural sweetness, as well as some of those other florals. So once it gets to the dry down, all you're left with is more florals, rose, patchouli, and woods leather vibe, basically. The fruits are always there, but they tone down significantly. Regardless of the facts, it's still pretty damn good. The initial impression with this was like 7.5 to an 8. Maybe let's just say 7.75 was the initial impression. As it dried down, the interesting factor did drop. It has kind of like this candied lemon vibe, basically like lemon candies, and the more sweeter ones. Not any sour lemon candy by any means. It's a more lemon heads, basically, if they're the sweet ones. It's been a long time, but lemon sweet candy with woods and those powdery florals is what I get with this one. It's that exact accord that drew its relationship to Oud Lemon Mint. It's not necessarily something that's a clone or anything like that, except it obviously uses a very similar style lime or lemon. It's going to be from the same house, so they're taking that note and placing it in this fragrance, but it's very distinct. It's distinct and also sharing similar accords except for the almond. Very different fragrances, but this one seeming like it's an easier to wear version of it. Almond sometimes can give me a headache, that glazed and borderline undertone of metallic, and sometimes making the fragrance seem stale, is pretty much gone with Oud Blue Notes, but arguably less niche-esque and less challenging, making it a more mass appealing and ultimately less interesting fragrance. This one in itself I still find interesting and deserving of that 7.75. A relationship to Oud Lemon Mint, yes, but it's only specific in a couple of accords like the leather patchouli and that sweetened lemon accord, and that's it. By no means is it redundant, because the overall vibe of both fragrances is completely different. The almond takes it to a whole nother level, and the performance of that one is actually pretty beastly. In comparison to this one on Tester Strip, it seems like it dies off at around hour 8 to 9. So that's what I think about Blue Oud Notes, one of the best ones of this specific haul. Moving on to the next one, it's Amber Fever, a newer release, and I wasn't really expecting what I got with this fragrance. Not necessarily a bad fragrance by any means, but what it smells like to me, I'm over, basically. So it's gonna come with a bit of bias, my opinion on this, and for that reason I want to try and keep it as objective as possible in terms of what I get. What I end up with is a fragrance that smells like this sweetened, boozy baccarat vibe, basically. Since that's the case, more people are gonna think about Instant Crush, which a lot of people can potentially say smells like BR540. I think it's a bit more interesting. I actually love Instant Crush. It's got not just that amber woods that gives it that spun sugar vibe, but more interesting ginger, a lot of citruses. One of my top 5, I would say, Mancera. This one kind of takes away a lot of those interesting factors, tones down all of those citruses, the zingy nature, and just adds the sweetened caramel, I believe it is, and whiskey. And that's pretty much it, man. It's a boozier, sweeter, and slightly more refined, or softer, I should say, than BR540 style DNA. The actual notes of this fragrance led me to believe it's going to have just like a bunch of accords, and it's not that. It doesn't have a bunch of notes. It's just, I don't really pick up too much. Once I drew that relationship, it was done. And that's why I prefaced by saying biases, etc. Although the note breakdown seems really intoxicating. I mean, we've got notes of like whiskey, caramel, there's even hazelnut, there's white musk, ambers. Anyways, there's a bunch of notes of this fragrance, but that's ultimately what I get. Is it a good fragrance? Absolutely. If you like those vibes, you're going to like this one. I don't know how well it's going to do in terms of its performance. I'm not really driven to rock this one, to be honest with you guys, and it's one that's going to be just first impression and done. There is something in that early opening, and I think it's coming from that whiskey, that's just not doing it for me, because the whole fragrance in itself kind of smells fantasy, the whole baccarat vibe. It smells rather synthetic. Add that with some boozy synthetic vibes, and it's too much. I will say, however, that it seemingly does the whole DNA a favor later in the dry down, but that initial blast is just not it for me. And I would even say that BR540 for me would be my pick. It's not the worst fragrance in the world. I do believe there's going to be people that enjoy it, but just not for me. Moving on to the next fragrance, it's called Sicily. This is one I was on the fence on buying for a very long time, and mostly because of its classification in terms of the genders. There's a lot of voting for femininity, and I can absolutely see that. However, I'll tell you that, to my surprise, pleasantly surprised, it's pretty unisex. It's got a blast of fruits. It's one that'll make you smile. It's feel-good, happy vibes all day, and specifically going to be this combination of that mandarin orange and peach, at least what I get mostly of to my nose. Also has a very crisp apple, and unfortunately very crisp. And why I say unfortunately is because it comes off a little bit synthetic. As it starts to dry down, you will get some florals, mostly going to be of that rose and jasmine, and the dry down is woodsy notes and musk. So I initially loved these style fragrances. I absolutely loved it, and it kind of gives you like a same vein as, think of natural freshies, right? Like Afternoon Swim. I'm not saying it smells like it by any means. We're talking about naturalistic smelling freshies. If that thing lasted, it would be amazing. Even the Guerlain Aqua Forte series. I have the Forte Mandarin Basilic and a few of the Tillier colognes, like Pacific Moss, I believe it's called, or something like that, along with the other one I have, which is Orange Sanguine. Those are great fragrances. They smell really good, but they're very specific. And not only that, they're pretty synthetic. They are pretty synthetic. The citruses, the blast, it's almost piercing. It smells or it feels like a shard. It feels like you're taking an ice pick to the brain after a while, because these types of fragrances don't really develop. This one did develop and got a lot softer in that very strong citruses, and I love it. Unfortunately, it's too much. It's too much in that citrus sense. If you're wearing this outdoors and you're going out during the summertime, along with those other fragrances as well, they'll work. But when you're consistently smelling the same strong accords and the chemical compounds that create the whole citruses, it can start to get very piercing and borderline headache inducing, honestly. So like I was saying, if you're gonna be outdoors and you're not gonna consistently smell the fragrance like the whole time, it's really good. I love it. It makes me happy, all that good stuff. But like I said, man, it's that piercing citruses, and there's really no way around it if you want like that many fruits. And unfortunately, that's the nature of things with a lot of these fresher or more natural smelling fresh citrus realistic notes that are using synthetics. When you start to pay a little bit higher end, you are going to get fragrances that are a bit more well blended or a little bit more naturalistic. Afternoon Swim does not do that for me. Pacific Chill doesn't do it for me either. And not necessarily the fact, obviously a part of that factor is going to be the price point that you pay for, but also the blend in itself as well. It's not all just the quality of ingredients, it's the way that it's composed together. These are designed to make those notes shine for the people who enjoy that. For some people it might come off like cleaners, etc., but for me, I actually enjoy those notes, like the Aqua Forte, Allegoria series, all of that. But unfortunately, that's a family of fragrances that I ended up like buying about 6 fragrances in that similar family, the whole Atelier Cologne, the Allegoria series, and now this. And I started to realize that these really aren't for me because they don't work for me. Not necessarily a bad smelling, they just give me a headache. And that's pretty much it with Sicily. A fragrance I really wanted to enjoy, just it's a bit too harsh for me personally. The jasmine does try and soften things out, but nothing more than that. The scent profile in itself, I wanted to give it like a, almost an 8, but as it started to develop and I started to live with it a little bit and draw those experiences and start to develop a little bit of a headache, it dropped easily to like a 6 out of 10. That's my opinion. I think there's still people people that will appreciate Sicily. And like I said, you have to absolutely make sure that you're wearing this outside where it can actually ventilate and you're not constantly sniffing it. In that light, I'm almost positive my score will increase, but nothing more about that. The next one I bought is called Midnight Gold, and this is probably the most mid of them all. And what do I even mean by that? It's just average. Like, there isn't anything, you know, show-stopping. There isn't anything that like makes me really want to try this. The note breakdown seems relatively interesting, and it stays pretty true in terms of the scent and what you're gonna get. Just seems like it's just a fragrance. Honestly, that's the best way I could put it, man. There's nothing more to be said. As it starts to dry down, you get more of like this rose and cedarwood combination. It does say that it has oud, but I feel like focuses more so on like patchouli cedar style of a dry down. The musk does a pretty good job at softening out all of those peppers. It's not something that's going to be protruding or anything like that. The opening is the best part of this fragrance. That neroli, cardamom, and rosemary is attention grabbing, and that's pretty much it. There isn't anything like, you know, solid as a backbone that I could be like, damn, this is really good. You're just gonna smell good. I mean, and for that, it deserves an average score, like a 6.5 out of 10. In terms of its longevity, I came back to the tester strip at like hour 10, and I could still smell it. It was faint. It just smelled like woods, rose, and a little bit of freshness. And that's pretty much it with Midnight Gold. There isn't anything else I really can say about this one. Not a bad fragrance by any means. You can signature scent that if you wanted to, but it smells designer-esque, and honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. Just not something that's like spectacular. That's pretty much it with that one. I would say that it is relatively unisex, drying down into something that starts to lean a bit more feminine. There is a hefty dose of rose, which can potentially take this one into the unisex territory, which does actually. And as it starts to dry down, it becomes more prominent, allowing it to be even more towards the neutrality in the gender realm. Last but not least, this is also another new one that got a little bit of hype, and I haven't really been following it too much. I didn't even look up on Fragrantica until I actually got the fragrance after I sniffed and I started taking a look. This is called Cosmic Pepper. So clear similarities to Allure Sport Edition, not Edition Blanche, Oh Extreme. And I can absolutely see that. However, I will say that this smells like a, I don't want to say more natural take, but it emphasizes a little bit more on more natural style accords and less on that musk, that signature musk from Chanel. So I do get this very tangy and tart-like opening that's coming from the tangerine and lemon opening, which kind of makes it seem a bit more naturalistic. I'm not going to say that this is a natural smelling fragrance, but the ambergris in this one also smells decent quality, genuinely. And that's where this one kind of takes it a little bit differently from Oh Extreme. A bit more crisp from those peppers, a bit slightly more tangy, and less musky, with the ambergris adding a bit more of an oceanic or an aquatic freshness to it. So a fragrance that definitely does remind me of Oh Extreme, but I will say that I'm not a fan of Oh Extreme, and it's because of the fact that those musks can go like BO if you're wearing it in the wrong season or on the wrong person, basically. On my skin, I personally don't get it to go BO, but even the fragrance in itself can sometimes do that. And if you wear it in high heat or even heat in general, I found it to do that. This, although reminding me of Oh Extreme, does not give me that BO vibe. And for me personally, it's one I would reach for first. I'm not gonna say it's a better fragrance. I haven't rocked it yet, but I'm absolutely gonna be rocking it. And actually, I might make this my scent of the day. So if you're interested in finding out what I think during the day, make sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok, because that's where I show you guys literally the days that I wear my fragrance. And not only that, I have a series that drops once a week, Gems of the Week, basically, where every week is going to be new fragrances. And you'll get a more in-depth style review from those videos before even talking about them in recommendations in the future. And that's pretty much it, what I think about all of these fragrances, ladies and gentlemen. This last one being probably one of the best ones. I'm gonna be rocking both of these and reporting back soon. And we're basically cooking up a full-blown buying guide of Mancera. There are gonna be about 5 more that I need to test. Maybe about 10 more that I need to test. And we'll be back here soon. Make sure to leave a like, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss those videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.